Hey guys, Jeffrey from Headstrong Training Systems here. So today we're going to be looking at the high bar squat, and in particular we're going to be looking at the effects of pelvis control, so how we manipulate our pelvis, whether it be anterior tilting or posterior tilting, how that can affect our high bar squat. So the first thing that we can do with the pelvis is we can tuck the pelvis. Now when we tuck the pelvis, the biggest thing we can do with that in its effect on the high bar squat is it can increase our knee travel. When we tuck that pelvis in, it's going to increase the amount of knee travel that we can create or achieve in the high bar squat. Now, as a secondary or as a primary result of more knee travel, the biggest consequence or the biggest result of that is we can reach a greater depth on our high bar squat. So what I mean by that is we can sink lower. And the reason for that is because the more our knees travel forward, the more space it allows for our hips to sink down into the hole. So let's put that into effect. So right now I'm in my position of my high bar squat. Just real quickly, basically we're going to be looking in depth at the high bar squat where the barbell is actually placed on my traps higher up compared to the low bar. And so basically from this point, if I leave from my starting position, if I leave my pelvis neutral and untucked, like so, you'll see that because my hips have already started in an untucked position, as I perform my eccentric, as I begin my descent into the hole, you'll see that there is a bigger tendency for my hips to go back. And as a result of my hips going back more, as I sink down, there will be, as a consequence, lesser knee travel, and it becomes harder for me to hit the hole, or it becomes harder for me to go deep in the high bar squat. Now, let's look at a direct effect. Right now, my pelvis is untucked, everything is neutral even, loaded into the hole. It's as low as I can go. But you see, as I tuck my pelvis through, you see what happens? As I tuck my pelvis through, I can sink a lot lower. And the reason for that is because of your pelvis joint, the direction of your pelvis joint. Basically, you've got your pelvis here, and you've got your two legs coming out of the pelvis of the two sockets. When my pelvis is untucked, I've got more of my sockets for my legs facing back, facing the posterior direction, or facing back. So as I sink down, there's a tendency, because my pelvis is facing down, there is a tendency for travel to occur in a backwards direction, which is why I've got my hips going back. As a result, when I tuck my hips through and I tuck my pelvis through, that actually changes the direction of the sockets, or my hip sockets, and so there's a greater tendency for my knees and my lower limbs to travel in an anterior direction. And so when there is greater anterior direction travel of my legs and my knees go out more, that allows me to sink my hips down more, create more space, and that's why I can hit better depth. So right in this bottom position, when I tuck my hips through and so basically like this is where my hip socket is. My hip socket's back here, and that's where with an untucked pelvis. When I tuck my pelvis through, you see that this socket moves forward, and as such, so does my knees. You see that? So that's the role of the pelvis in essentially dictating knee and hip travel in the high bar squat, and as a result of that, that also dictates how deep you can sink or how well you can hit the hole with on the high bar squat. So basically, to summarize the video today very quickly, when on the high bar squat, I would highly recommend, or the technique or the form I teach is starting in your starting position to make sure your pelvis is tucked through. Make sure your pelvis is tucked through, because with that, when your pelvis is tucked through, we get greater knee travel, we get more space, we create more space for the hips to sink into the hole, and as a result of that, when we get more space hitting the hole and more knee travel, our torso actually becomes more upright. And that's the torso direction we want in the high bar squat. In contrast to the low bar squat, we want our torso to be as upright as possible before going to arching or excessive arching. Essentially, we want a flat back. We always want a flat back, but the more upright flat back we can achieve, the better in a high bar squat. So that's all from me today, guys. Hopefully that was helpful for you, and I'll catch you guys next time. Take care.